wedding feast had not yet ended when the King of France rose and turned toward the bridal chamber. Music still carried through the royal apartments in Marseille. Candles smoked beneath tapestries. Courtiers had spent the day watching two 14-year-olds become husband and wife before a pope, a king, and the full machinery of European power. Now King Francis I was taking the marriage one step further. He escorted his son Henry and the new bride, Catherine de Medici, toward the room where their alliance was expected to become permanent. Modern historians agree that Francis involved himself directly in the bedding and later declared, using the language of jousting, that both young spouses had fulfilled their duty. What he actually saw remains disputed. There is no reliable evidence that a crowd surrounded the bed. No trustworthy record describes displayed sheets, a formal inspection, or numbered witnesses. But the supported reality is disturbing enough. The King of France placed the wedding chamber of two adolescents under royal authority because the marriage was too politically important to remain private. By the next morning, Pope Clement VII would visit the newlyweds in bed and bless the completed union. The two older rulers who had built the alliance could now treat it as sealed. Catherine had entered the chamber as an orphaned foreign heiress whose value depended on diplomacy. She left it tied more firmly to a dynasty that might discard her the moment she failed to produce an heir. For 10 years, no child came. Courtiers began discussing whether the marriage should be ended. Her husband fathered a child elsewhere. His powerful mistress controlled access to him. Catherine's place in France narrowed to a single brutal question: could her body serve the succession? So why did the King of France involve himself in the wedding night of two 14-year-olds? And how did that supervised marriage become the first stage of Catherine's struggle to survive? If you're drawn to the darker corners of history, subscribe to Grimmer History. We're on our way to 45,000 subscribers. Long before Catherine entered a French wedding chamber, she had already learned that power could change a child's identity overnight. She was born in Florence in 1519. Her father belonged to the Medici dynasty. Her mother connected her to French nobility. Both parents died within weeks of her birth. Catherine inherited names, money, and political value. She did not inherit protection. As a child, she moved through a world in which the Medici family's control of Florence was repeatedly challenged. When their enemies overthrew the government in 1527, Catherine fell into rebel hands. She was placed in convents while armies, diplomats, and rival factions argued over the future of the city. To the women caring for her, she was a vulnerable orphan. To the men negotiating around her, she was leverage. The experience left a pattern that would follow Catherine for the rest of her life. Safety did not depend on innocence. It depended on whether powerful people still found her useful. Her principal guardian was Pope Clement VII, a Medici relative trying to defend papal and family interests in a peninsula divided by war. France and the Habsburg Emperor competed for influence across Italy. Clement feared imperial domination and needed allies. Francis I, the ambitious King of France, needed the Pope for the same reason. The marriage negotiations joined those interests. Francis offered his second son, Henry, Duke of Orleans. Clement offered papal cooperation, Medici connections, and financial promises. Catherine and Henry supplied the human bond. Both were 14. Henry was a royal prince, but not yet the heir. His older brother Francois stood ahead of him in the succession. That made the match prestigious enough for Clement and safe enough for Francis. The king could gain an alliance without placing an Italian merchant dynasty directly beside the throne. French nobles still looked down on Catherine. The Medici had risen through banking and political control, not ancient royal blood. Some at court would later mock her origins. But in 1533, her guardian was Pope, and that made the orphan from Florence valuable enough to marry a son of France. Her private wishes were not recorded. That silence should not be mistaken for consent. Dynastic marriage was not designed around the preferences of adolescents. It joined territories, money, military expectations, and diplomatic promises. A bride carried those obligations into another court. Her clothing might be covered in jewels, but beneath the ceremony, she remained part of the contract. and a contract could still be challenged if the marriage remained incomplete. Under church law, consent created a valid union, but consummation gave it stronger protection. An unconsummated marriage might, under certain conditions, be dissolved by papal authority. Completion made separation more difficult. That is why the wedding night mattered. Francis and Clement had not spent months arranging a beautiful ceremony. They had built a political structure they wanted made difficult to undo. The church would bless the marriage. The court would witness it, and before Marseille slept, the king intended to know that the alliance had passed beyond words. Catherine arrived in Marseille surrounded by a papal entourage, officials, attendants, clerics, and the visual splendor expected of an international alliance. The city became a stage. French royalty met the papal court. Clerks recorded gifts and expenses. Negotiators protected the promises beneath the celebration. Bells, music, and public ceremony announced that two ruling powers had reached an agreement. Catherine stood at the center of it, yet almost none of the power belonged to her. Pope Clement VII, her guardian and the architect of the match, wanted a permanent Medici connection to the French dynasty. Francis I wanted papal support against Emperor Charles V. Henry was expected to obey his father. Catherine was expected to enter France, preserve the alliance, and eventually produce legitimate children. Each person had a role. Only the two youngest people had no authority over the design. The marriage took place on the 28th of October, 1533. Catherine and Henry were dressed for a royal union, surrounded by noble families, churchmen, diplomats, and the combined display of France and Rome. The ceremony was followed by feasting, dancing, and tournament-style entertainments. The court celebrated into the night. The atmosphere was designed to communicate abundance: embroidered fabrics, ceremonial vessels, musicians, servants moving between tables, torchlight against stone walls. But the beauty concealed a legal anxiety. Clement's political position could change. Francis could reconsider the value of the alliance. Catherine's promised dowry and diplomatic advantages might not arrive exactly as agreed. If the marriage remained incomplete, either side might later find a reason to challenge it. The safest alliance was one already beyond easy reversal. That required more than vows. Around midnight, the public celebration narrowed toward a private room. This transition was familiar in elite marriages. The couple could be ceremonially escorted. Attendants might prepare the chamber and place the spouses in bed. Courtiers could wait in adjoining spaces rather than watching the intimate act itself. In Catherine's case, the presence of Francis made the political purpose unmistakable. He was not merely a father sending his son away after a feast. He was the king whose foreign policy depended on the union. The chamber lay under his authority, just as Henry did. Modern accounts describe Francis as accompanying the pair, supervising the bedding, or remaining until he was satisfied that the marriage would be completed. The exact duration of his presence is unclear. The earliest chain behind some later details is difficult to reconstruct. That uncertainty matters. But uncertainty does not erase the power relationship. Catherine could not simply refuse and return to Florence. She had no parents, no independent territory, and no personal force at court. Clement had negotiated her future. Francis controlled the country she had entered. Henry was a prince obeying his father. Even if the king withdrew before the marriage was physically completed, his involvement transformed the chamber. Privacy existed only at his permission. The result was expected to be reported. The political meaning would be publicly acknowledged. Catherine's emotions that night are unknown. She may have been frightened, resigned, determined, or unable to separate personal feeling from duty. Any stronger claim would be invention. Henry's thoughts are equally absent. He was also 14 and under paternal authority. Yet his future would offer him freedoms Catherine would never receive. He could keep mistresses, spend time away from his wife, and father children outside the marriage without losing his place in the dynasty. Catherine's security would depend on producing legitimate heirs. That imbalance had not yet fully revealed itself. Before dawn, Francis reportedly used the language of a tournament to praise the courage shown in the marital joust. The remark turned a private event into a courtly verdict. The alliance had been tested, Both participants had performed their assigned duty. The next morning, Clement visited the couple in bed and blessed them. The architects of the marriage had received their confirmation. But within a year, one of those architects would be dead, and Catherine would discover that consummation could make a marriage harder to erase without making a foreign bride safe. The bridal chamber in Marseille should not be reconstructed as a theater filled with spectators. That image is popular because it is immediate. A crowd around a bed creates an obvious villain and an easily understood violation. It appears in sensational videos, social media captions, and generalized stories about royal wedding customs. The evidence does not support it. There is no reliable account of 23 male witnesses. No firm record says Francis stood beside the bed throughout the entire act. No trustworthy source describes blood-stained sheets being raised before the court. Those claims should be rejected. The supported scene is quieter. That makes it more revealing. A heavy ceremonial bed stood inside a royal apartment, prepared for two adolescents. Curtains, tapestries, candlelight, and attendants formed the normal material world of an elite chamber. Outside lay the French court, the papal party, and a city celebrating an alliance. Inside were Catherine and Henry. At or near the threshold stood the authority of Francis I. The king had arranged the match. His son's obedience belonged to him. The bride's future depended on his favor. Whether Francis remained for minutes, oversaw the ceremonial placement, withdrew and waited for a report, or personally observed more than later accounts make clear, cannot be proven. What can be proven is that he claimed the result. His later jousting metaphor publicly certified that both young spouses had fulfilled the expectation placed upon them. Clement's blessing in bed the next morning reinforced that recognition. The marriage had moved from spoken consent to acknowledged completion. This was verification, not medical verification, not a formal tribunal, political verification. The bodies of Catherine and Henry had been used to strengthen an agreement between two older rulers. For Francis, consummation reduced the chance that Clement could later loosen the union if papal policy changed. For Clement, it placed his dependent more securely inside the Valois family. For both, it transformed negotiations into kinship. Catherine's usefulness had begun. The imbalance appears even more clearly when we look at what happened next. Less than a year after the wedding, Clement VII died. His successor did not preserve the same political partnership or honor all the expectations attached to the match. Catherine's value as the Pope's chosen bride weakened almost immediately. The alliance that had justified the urgency of her wedding night was already fading. Catherine remained in France because Francis continued to protect her. That protection was not affection alone. The king had invested his authority in the marriage. Discarding Catherine too quickly would expose the weakness of an arrangement he had publicly celebrated and personally helped secure. For a time, that was enough. Henry increasingly attached himself to Diane de Poitiers, a powerful court woman who became his long-term favorite and mistress. Diane possessed influence Catherine lacked. She controlled access to Henry, received his devotion, and became one of the central figures around the prince. Catherine was the lawful wife. Diane held much of the emotional and political intimacy. Then the succession changed. In 1536, Henry's elder brother François died. Henry became Dauphin, the direct heir to the French throne. Catherine was no longer merely the wife of a second son. She was the future queen. Her childlessness became a national problem. The pressure turned brutally practical. France needed legitimate heirs. Henry demonstrated that he could father a child when a daughter was born outside the marriage. That shifted suspicion toward Catherine. Courtiers discussed replacing her. The same marriage that Francis had helped make difficult to dissolve could still be attacked if dynastic survival demanded it. Canon law, royal influence, and papal authority might be directed toward another solution. Catherine understood what could happen to a politically inconvenient wife. The chamber in Marseille had not guaranteed her place. It had only guaranteed that removing her would require a stronger justification. For years, she lived inside that uncertainty. Physicians were consulted, Remedies were attempted. Later stories surrounded the fertility crisis with sorcery, grotesque potions, and elaborate intimate procedures. Much of that material belongs to hostile legend or medical speculation, not secure evidence. The supported facts are stark enough. Catherine had no child. Henry had proved capable of fatherhood elsewhere. The court needed an heir. Her future was debated by others. Even Diane had a practical reason to preserve Catherine. A new royal bride might arrive with her own family, favorites, and political ambitions. Catherine, isolated and dependent, was less threatening. Diane reportedly encouraged Henry to spend sufficient time with his wife to fulfill his dynastic duty. The mistress helped preserve the marriage because the existing wife was useful. Nearly 11 years after Marseille, Catherine gave birth to a son. The child secured what the king's supervision could not: her survival. Catherine's first surviving son was born in January 1544. He would become Francis II. The birth changed her position immediately. The foreign bride, who had spent years under the threat of repudiation, had produced the next generation of the dynasty. The court could no longer treat her as a failed experiment. More children followed. Catherine eventually bore 10 children in total, including 3 future kings of France. The woman once blamed for childlessness became the mother through whom the Valois succession continued. But motherhood did not give her control all at once. Henry became King Henry II in 1547 after the death of Francis I. The same year also removed the man who had protected Catherine from repudiation. As queen, she stood higher than ever, yet Diane remained the king's dominant favorite. Diane received estates, jewels, influence, and symbols of royal closeness. Catherine fulfilled ceremonial and dynastic duties while watching another woman occupy much of the private space around her husband. This arrangement reveals the unequal logic built into the marriage from the beginning. Henry's body could serve the dynasty and his own preferences. Catherine's body had one acceptable purpose: legitimate succession. Her years of apparent infertility had nearly ended her position. His long-term infidelity did not threaten his crown. Catherine learned to survive through restraint. She observed factions. She cultivated relationships. She raised children whose marriages would become new pieces of European diplomacy. The orphan, who had once been moved between convents, now studied the mechanics of the court from within. Then, in 1559, Henry was critically injured in a tournament. The language of jousting returned to Catherine's life in a darker form. The king, whose father had reportedly used a jousting metaphor to certify the wedding night, was struck during an actual contest and died from his injuries. Catherine became a widow. She also became more powerful than anyone at the Marseille celebration could have predicted. Her sons inherited the crown in succession. Because they were young, inexperienced, or physically weak, Catherine became queen mother, regent, advisor, and political center of the Valois monarchy. She negotiated among noble factions, foreign powers, and rival religious movements during the French Wars of Religion. Her record in those years remains contested. She made compromises and reversals. She participated in a violent system. Her role in decisions surrounding the massacre of Protestants in 1572 has been debated for centuries. She should not be remade into an innocent saint, but neither should her later power erase her beginning. Before Catherine became the feared queen mother of French propaganda, she had been an orphan whose value was negotiated by men. Before she controlled royal marriages, her own had been arranged without a surviving record of her wishes. Before critics called her unnatural for exercising authority, the French monarchy had judged her worth through fertility. The system did not merely victimize Catherine, it trained her. It taught her that ceremonies hid contracts, that family affection could disappear when alliances shifted, that a woman without heirs could be replaced, that survival required making herself necessary before someone decided she was expendable. She eventually mastered that world. History would use her success as proof that she had always been a monster. By the time Catherine became one of the most powerful women in Europe, her enemies had discovered the most effective way to attack her. They made her foreignness look poisonous. French opponents described the Italian queen as secretive, manipulative, and unnatural. Protestant writers blamed her for religious persecution and royal violence. Political pamphlets presented her life as a catalogue of deception. An anonymous hostile work published during the Wars of Religion helped define the legend. It portrayed Catherine not as a ruler navigating civil conflict, but as the corrupt source of France's disasters. The text spread through repeated editions and translations. It was propaganda, but it became memory. Later stories added poison cabinets, occult rituals, assassins, astrologers, and secret murders. Catherine did have an interest in astrology, as many rulers did. She did participate in ruthless politics. Yet the image of a habitual poisoner belongs far more to polemic and fiction than to established evidence. The legend benefited several groups. Her political enemies could turn complex wars into the wickedness of one foreign woman. Male rulers could escape scrutiny by presenting female authority as the unnatural cause of disorder. Dramatists received a ready-made villain draped in black. What disappeared was the earlier Catherine, the child held during the siege of Florence. The orphan sent across borders as part of papal diplomacy. The 14-year-old bride, whose marriage was placed under royal supervision. The future queen, whose position remained insecure until she produced a son. The myths about the wedding night work in a similar way. Claiming that a large crowd watched everything transforms the event into a single sensational outrage. It can be dismissed as bizarre court custom or exaggerated folklore. The documented system is harder to dismiss. Francis did not need 23 witnesses. His authority was enough. He escorted or supervised the adolescents, expected completion, and later announced that the duty had been performed. Clement blessed the couple in bed the next morning. The court understood the message. The alliance had been secured through them. The greater horror was not how many people stood in the room. It was how many institutions stood behind the door. Why did Francis I involve himself in the wedding chamber of Catherine de' Medici and his own 14-year-old son? Because the marriage belonged to the state before it belonged to them. Francis wanted papal cooperation against the emperor. Clement wanted a Medici dependent inside the French royal family. Church law made consummation politically valuable because it strengthened the union against future dissolution. The king's presence, or supervision, turned that legal concern into personal authority. He helped bring the couple to the chamber. He expected confirmation. He later spoke as though the performance of duty could be announced like victory in a tournament. And how did that moment shape Catherine's life? It taught her that entry into a dynasty was not the same as safety. Clement died. The alliance weakened. Henry preferred Diane. The court considered replacing Catherine when no heir appeared. Only childbirth secured what ceremony, blessing, and royal supervision had failed to guarantee. Catherine survived long enough to become Queen Mother, and one of Europe's most formidable political figures. That later power cannot make the 14-year-old bride disappear. No reliable evidence places a crowd around her bed. No document preserves her private feelings. What survives is the system, a pope who negotiated her, a king who supervised the union, a dynasty that measured her through heirs, and enemies who later turned her survival into proof of wickedness. Marseille remembered the music. France remembered the alliance. But behind the curtains of the royal chamber, two adolescents learned that their marriage had never truly belonged to them.